5 years had passed since the Velkari first attacked New Boston Colony. War Commander HFY stood in his command center aboard the flagship Dominant Will, staring at reports that should have filled him with pride. The Velkari Empire had conquered 12 human worlds. Their fleets controlled the space lanes between human colonies. By every military measure, they were winning the war. So why did victory feel like defeat? "Sir," said his aide, Subcommander Veltesh, "we have another report from the occupation forces on Liberty Station." HFY took the data pad and read in silence. 3 more Velkari supply convoys had been destroyed by human raiders. A weapons depot had been bombed. 2 Velkari officers had been killed by sniper fire. The garrison commander was requesting another 1,000 troops to maintain order. "That's the same request he made last month," HFY muttered. "And the month before that." He walked to the viewing port and looked out at the stars. Somewhere, out there, human resistance fighters were planning their next attack. They never stopped. When the Velkari destroyed 1 resistance cell, 2 more appeared. When they captured human leaders, new ones took their place within days. "Sir," Veltesh said carefully, "perhaps it's time to consider harsher measures against the human civilians." HFY turned to look at his aide. Veltesh was young, eager for promotion, and had never been stationed on a conquered human world. "What do you suggest, Sub-Commander?" "Execute 10 civilians for every Velkari soldier killed. Destroy entire cities if necessary. Show them that resistance only brings suffering. We tried that on Mars colony." HFY replied tiredly. "Do you know what happened?" Veltesh shook his head. "The human resistance doubled in size overnight. Every family member of every executed civilian joined the fight against us. We turned a manageable insurgency into a planet-wide rebellion." HFY had been there when they destroyed the city of New Denver as a demonstration of Velkari power. He had expected the surviving humans to surrender in terror. Instead, they had broadcast the destruction to every human world with a simple message. "Remember New Denver, make them pay." "Sir," Veltesh said uncertainly, "surely the humans will see reason eventually. No species can sustain this level of resistance indefinitely." HFY laughed bitterly. "That's what I thought 5 years ago. That's what I thought 3 years ago. That's what I thought last year." He pulled up a holographic display showing the locations of human resistance activities. Red dots covered every conquered world like a disease. "Look at this, Sub-Commander, tell me what you see." Veltesh studied the display. "Active resistance on all occupied worlds, sir, but the numbers are manageable." "Manageable?" HFY's voice rose. "We've lost more ships to human raiders than we lost in the conquest of the previous 10 species combined. We've had to triple our garrison forces on every world. Our supply lines are under constant attack. How is any of this manageable?" Before Veltesh could answer, another officer approached with urgent news. "Sir, we've received a priority message from Commander Velkar on Earth Station." HFY took the communication device. Commander Velkar's face appeared on the screen, but something was wrong. The veteran officer looked haggard and exhausted, his usually perfect uniform disheveled. "War Commander," Velkar said, his voice shaking slightly, "I need to request immediate transfer from this posting." "Denied," HFY replied immediately. "You're one of our best commanders, Velkar. Earth Station is too important to—" "Sir, please," Velkar interrupted, something he had never done in 20 years of service. I can't do this anymore. They never stop. Never. I lost my entire night patrol to a human bomb yesterday. 12 good soldiers dead because they tried to inspect what looked like an abandoned building." HFY frowned. Velkar had conquered 6 worlds before the human war. He was a hardened veteran who had never shown weakness before. "Commander, you've faced insurgencies before." "Not like this," Velkar said desperately. "Sir, the humans don't fight like other species. When we conquered the Altair system, the locals resisted for 6 months before accepting their situation. The Centauri resistance lasted a year. But the humans—" He paused, rubbing his eyes. "Sir, it's been 5. Years. 5 years of constant attacks, constant vigilance, constant death. My soldiers are breaking down. Half of them request transfers every month. The other half are drinking synthetic alcohol to forget what they've seen. What have they seen, Commander? HFY asked quietly. Human children, sir, no older than our young, strapping bombs to themselves and walking into our checkpoints. Human elders, too frail to fight, passing intelligence to resistance cells until their dying breath. Humans who surrender during the day and attack us at night. Humans who smile at us while serving food and poison us with the next meal. Velkar's voice broke. Sir, I've been a soldier for 30 years. I've conquered worlds and put down rebellions. But I've never fought an enemy that hates us more than they love their own lives. The humans don't just want us gone. They want us to suffer for every day we stay. HFY ended the communication and stood in silence. Around the command center, other officers pretended not to have heard, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. The great Velkari Empire was being slowly destroyed by an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat. Sir, said intelligence officer Morthek, approaching with another report, we've intercepted human communications from the outer colonies. They're calling for something called Operation Boomerang. What does that mean? HFY asked. We're not certain, sir. But Admiral Carter has been recalled from the Resistance Coordination Center. She's taking command of their remaining fleet. HFY felt a chill run down his spine. Admiral Carter was the human who had refused their initial offer. Intelligence reports described her as brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to human independence. If she was taking active command of their military forces, it meant the humans were planning something big. How many ships do they have left? He asked. Approximately 8, sir. All damaged, all outgunned by our forces. Then why am I worried? HFY muttered to himself. The answer came 3 days later when human forces struck at the heart of the Velkari supply network. Using tactics that no military academy had ever taught, Admiral Carter's tiny fleet attacked 6 different systems simultaneously. They didn't try to hold territory or engage in direct combat. Instead, they destroyed supply depots, communication, relays, and repair facilities before disappearing back into the void. But the real shock came when HFY received reports from the raids. The human ships weren't just using captured Velkari technology, they had improved it, modified it, made it better than the original designs. How is this possible? He demanded when the reports reached his desk. Sir, said Chief Engineer Kolveth, the humans appear to have a natural talent for understanding and improving technology. They've taken our weapon systems and made them 20% more efficient. They've upgraded our shield generators to run on half the power. They've even improved our faster-than-light drives. HFY stared at the engineering reports in disbelief. They've had our technology for 5 years. We've had it for 1,000. Yes, sir. But they approach technology differently than we do. They don't just use it. They study it, modify it, improve it. It's like they can't help but make everything better. Better for them to use against us, HFY said grimly. The pattern continued for months. Human raids became more sophisticated, more devastating, and more coordinated. They struck at targets the Velkari didn't even know were vulnerable. They used Velkari technology in ways its creators had never imagined. Worst of all, they shared every innovation with resistance cells throughout occupied space. HFY found himself reading ancient military texts, looking for some precedent for the situation they faced. The Velkari had conquered dozens of species, but none of them had been like this. Other species fought to defend their territory, then accepted defeat when resistance became hopeless. Humans fought to make conquest so expensive that their enemies would eventually decide it wasn't worth the cost. Sir, Veltesh said one day, we've received another request for reinforcements from every occupied world. The garrison commanders say they need at least double their current troop strength to maintain order. Denied, HFY replied automatically. We can't strip our other territories to garrison human worlds. But sir, if we don't send reinforcements, we might lose control of the occupied territories. HFY looked at his aide with tired eyes. Sub-Commander, do you know what the humans call our occupation forces? No, sir. Targets, HFY said bitterly. Every soldier we send to a human world becomes a target for their resistance. Every base we build becomes a target for their saboteurs. Every supply convoy becomes a target for their raiders. We're not occupying their worlds. We're feeding our soldiers into a machine that turns them into casualties. Sir, what are you saying? HFY turned back to the viewing port and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were planning their next attack. They were studying captured Valkyrie technology, training new resistance fighters, and planning operations that would cost the Empire more resources than the last one. 10 years after the first attack on New Boston, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human flagship Retribution, watching Valkyrie homeworld grow larger on the main screen. The ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, and Valkyrie technology, built from the wreckage of a dozen battles and improved beyond anything either species had created alone. Admiral, said Captain Linda Cooper, his intelligence officer, long-range sensors confirm minimal orbital defenses. Most of their fleet is still deployed in our former territory trying to maintain control. Morrison nodded grimly. Operation Eternal Reminder was the culmination of 10 years of careful planning. The humans weren't trying to conquer the Valkyrie homeworld. They were going to deliver a message that would echo through Valkyrie culture for generations. How many ships do we have for this operation? Morrison asked. 47 vessels, sir, replied Commander Joe Martinez, his tactical officer, all crewed by volunteers who lost family in the war. Morrison looked around his bridge crew. Every face told a story of loss and determination. Captain Cooper had lost her parents when the Valkyrie bombed civilian shelters on Mars. Commander Martinez's wife had died fighting in the resistance on Luna Base. Engineering Chief Tony Garcia had watched his children evacuated from New Boston before the colony fell. These weren't professional soldiers anymore. They were something far more dangerous, humans with nothing left to lose and perfect memory of every wrong done to them. Sir, said Communications Officer Mary Johnson, we're receiving a transmission from the Valkyrie Defense Force. Put it through, Morrison ordered. A Valkyrie officer appeared on screen, his yellow eyes wide with panic. Human fleet, you are approaching Valkyrie Prime in violation of all interstellar law. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Morrison stepped forward where the alien could see him clearly. I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Resistance Fleet. We are not here to conquer your world. We are here to deliver a message. What message? The Valkyrie officer demanded. That we can reach you anywhere, Morrison replied calmly. That distance means nothing to us, that there is nowhere in the universe you can hide from the consequences of what you did to our people. The transmission cut off abruptly. Morrison turned to his crew. All ships, assume attack formation. But remember, we're not here to destroy their cities. We're here to make sure they never forget that we could if we wanted to. The human fleet swept through the Valkyrie home system like a storm. They destroyed military satellites, communication networks, and defense stations with surgical precision, but they carefully avoided civilian targets even when it would have been easier to destroy everything. Morrison wanted the Valkyrie to understand something important. Humans could be merciful, but only when they chose to be. This attack could have been genocide, but humans were making the conscious decision to limit their revenge. That choice itself was a message. On the surface of Valkyrie Prime, War Commander HFY watched the attack from his command bunker. He was old now, worn down by a decade of fighting an enemy that never stopped and never forgave. His hands shook as he read the reports of human ships moving through their most secure space like they owned it. Sir, said his aide, now Commander Veltesh, should we scramble our remaining defense fighters? HFY almost laughed. Against 47 human ships? Those fighters would be target practice. Besides, look at their attack pattern. They're not trying to destroy us, they're trying to prove a point. What point, sir? That this war will never end. HFY replied quietly. They're showing us that they can reach our homeworld whenever they want. They're telling us that no matter how long this conflict lasts, they will always come back for more. On the screen, he watched a human ship broadcast a message on all Valkyrie frequencies. Admiral Morrison's face appeared, and when he spoke, his words were translated into perfect Valkyrie. People of the Valkyrie Empire, Morrison said. 10 years ago, your leaders attacked innocent human colonies. They thought they could break our spirit with demonstrations of power. They thought we would surrender when we saw what their weapons could do. Morrison paused, letting his words sink in. They were wrong. Every civilian you killed became a martyr we remembered. Every world you conquered became a symbol of injustice we could never forget. Every act of cruelty became fuel for our determination to see justice done. HFY closed his eyes. He remembered standing in that same meeting room 10 years ago, confident that humans would fold like every other species the Valkyrie had encountered. How could he have known that he was threatening the one species in the galaxy that held grudges, like a religion? This attack could have destroyed your cities, Morrison continued in his broadcast. It could have killed millions of your people, but we chose not to do that, because unlike your leaders, we do not make war on innocence. The words hit HFY like physical blows. The humans were showing mercy, but they were making sure everyone knew it was a choice, not weakness. However, Morrison's voice hardened. Let this serve as a reminder to your empire and any others who might threaten humanity. We have very long memories, and we never stop until justice is served. This war can end today if your leaders choose wisdom over pride. But if it continues, know that we will follow you to every world you have ever touched, and we will never stop coming. The broadcast ended, and the human fleet began withdrawing, as suddenly as it had appeared. But they left behind something more devastating than any weapon, the knowledge that nowhere in Valkyrie space was truly safe from human revenge. In his bunker, HFY finally did something he had not done in 30 years of military service. He activated his personal communication device and sent a message directly to the Valkyrie High Council. Honorable Counselors, he wrote, I formally request an immediate end to hostilities with the human species. This war is destroying our empire, from within. Every day we continue fighting them makes us weaker while making them stronger. We must seek peace before they decide that mercy is no longer an option. The response came back within hours. The High Council was calling for an emergency session to discuss terms of surrender, but it was too late for simple surrender. The humans had spent 10 years turning their anger into a weapon more powerful than any technology. They had transformed every loss into motivation for greater effort. They had made their enemy's victory so expensive that the Valkyrie Empire was collapsing under the weight of its own success. On the human flagship, Admiral Morrison read intelligence reports from throughout Valkyrie space. Rebellion was spreading on dozens of worlds as other species saw that the mighty Valkyrie could be defeated. Trade routes were failing as the Empire devoted more and more resources to fighting an enemy that struck everywhere and nowhere. Admiral, Captain Cooper said, we're receiving communications from several Valkyrie commanders requesting ceasefire negotiations. Morrison looked at the messages with cold satisfaction. What are they offering? Complete withdrawal from human territory, sir. Reparations for war damages. Non-aggression pacts. Morrison shook his head. Not enough. After 10 years of war, they want to go back to the way things were before they attacked us? They still don't understand what they've done. What do you want from them, sir? Commander Martinez asked. Morrison thought about New Boston burning under Valkyrie attack. He thought about the children who had grown up in refugee camps, the families torn apart by war, the graves of every human who had died fighting for their freedom. I want them to remember, he said finally. I want their children to learn about this war in school. I want their leaders to think about human revenge every time they consider attacking another species. I want the name human to become a warning that echoes through their culture for 1,000 years. Captain Cooper looked at him with concern. Sir, that sounds like you want to make them afraid of us forever. Morrison turned to look at her, his eyes hard as steel. Captain, do you know what happens to bullies who are allowed to forget the consequences of their actions? No, sir. They find new victims, Morrison replied. The Valkyrie didn't just attack us. They've conquered 47 other species over the past 1,000 years. They turned entire civilizations into slaves and called it empire building. He gestured toward the intelligence reports showing rebellions spreading throughout Valkyrie space. This war isn't just about human freedom anymore. It's about making sure the Velkari never forget what happens when they try to enslave innocent people. It's about making their fear of human retribution so complete that they'll think twice before threatening anyone else. Morrison walked to the viewing port and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Velkari were learning that some enemies were more dangerous than others. Some enemies didn't just want to win. They wanted to make sure their opponents never forgot losing. "Sir," Communications Officer Johnson reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. President Sullivan wants to speak with you directly." Morrison took the communication in his private quarters. President Sullivan's face appeared on screen, looking older than her years, but proud of what humanity had accomplished. "Admiral Morrison," she said, "the Velkari High Council has sent a formal surrender offer through diplomatic channels. They're asking for our terms." 15 years after the first attack on New Boston, War Commander HFY stood before the Velkari High Council for what he knew would be the last time. His once proud uniform hung loose on his aged frame, and his yellow eyes had lost their fierce glow. The war with humanity had broken more than just his military career. It had broken his entire species' understanding of what it meant to be Velkari. "Honorable counselors," he said, his voice hoarse from years of desperate reports, "I come before you to formally recommend complete and unconditional surrender to the human forces." The council chamber erupted in angry voices. Councillor Morthak, the youngest member, stood and pointed an accusing finger at HFY. "You speak of surrender to an inferior species. The mighty Velkari Empire does not yield to anyone." "The mighty Velkari Empire is dying," HFY replied bluntly. "In 15 years of fighting humans, we have lost 60% of our fleet, 80% of our trade income, and the loyalty of half our subject species. Rebellions are spreading across the galaxy because other races have seen that we can be defeated." Elder Velthara, the council's historian, stood slowly. She was ancient even by Velkari standards, her memory reaching back nearly 2 centuries. "War Commander, in all our history we have never surrendered to anyone. To do so now would destroy our reputation throughout the galaxy." "Our reputation is already destroyed," HFY said bitterly. "Every species in known space is talking about how the humans turned our greatest military victory into our worst nightmare. They're saying that the Velkari Empire conquered humanity and then spent 15 years learning why that was a mistake." He activated a holographic display showing the current state of the Empire. Red zones marked areas of rebellion. Yellow zones showed regions with failing economies, and green zones were so few they could be counted on one hand. "Look at this," HFY continued. "The humans hold no territory except their original worlds, yet they've effectively destroyed our empire from within. They've turned occupation into a curse and victory into poison." Councillor Kolvash, the military liaison, reviewed the reports with growing dismay. "How is this possible? We defeated their fleets. We conquered their worlds. We control their space." "Do we?" HFY asked grimly. "Yesterday, human raiders destroyed 3 supply convoys in the Altair system. Last week, they sabotaged the main communications relay in the Centauri sector. This morning, resistance fighters on Mars Colony assassinated another garrison commander." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "We don't control human space, counselors. We're simply trapped in it, bleeding resources and soldiers, every day while they systematically destroy everything we've built." Elder Velthara accessed her personal archives, scrolling through centuries of military records. "War Commander, what makes the humans different from every other species we've conquered? They don't know how to quit," HFY replied immediately. "Every other species we've fought understood the concept of acceptable losses. When the cost of resistance became too high, they surrendered and accepted their fate. But humans don't think that way." He pulled up intercepted human communications from throughout the war. "Listen to this message, broadcast from the ruins of New Boston 3 years after we destroyed it. Remember New Boston. Remember every friend who died here. Remember every child who was orphaned. Remember every dream that was burned to ash. And make them pay for all of it." The council chamber fell silent as the translator rendered the human words into their language. The cold fury in the human voice made several counselors visibly uncomfortable. That message has been repeated on every conquered human world for 15 years, SciFi continued. They don't just resist our occupation, they worship their resistance. They've turned their hatred of us into a religious doctrine that they pass down to their children. Counselor Morthak shook his head in disbelief. Surely their civilian population wants peace. They must be growing tired of constant warfare. The civilian population is the resistance, SciFi replied. Human children learn to make explosives before they learn to read. Human elders pass intelligence to resistance cells with their dying breath. Human families celebrate the deaths of our soldiers like religious holidays. He showed them footage from occupied human worlds. Instead of the broken, submissive populations they expected to see, the counselors watched humans who moved through their daily lives with quiet determination, always watching for opportunities to strike back at their occupiers. They've made hatred of the Velkari Empire into their cultural identity, SciFi explained. Being conquered by us didn't break their spirit. It gave them a purpose that unites their entire species. Elder Velthara suddenly stopped scrolling through her archives. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were shaking as she accessed a file that hadn't been opened in centuries. Counselors, she said in a whisper, I found something. An ancient warning from the archives of Elder Kethmoro. She activated her own holographic display, showing text that was nearly 300 years old. The ancient Velkari script was difficult to read, but the translation slowly appeared for the modern council. To those who come after, the text, read, I leave this warning about the species that must never be wakened. They are not like other races we have encountered. They hold grudges like stars hold light, burning for eternity without dimming. They do not know the meaning of the words acceptable losses or reasonable surrender. The council listened in growing horror as Velthara continued reading. Should you ever encounter them again, do not fight them, do not threaten them. Do not harm them in any way. They will follow you to the ends of the universe if you wrong them, and they will never stop until they have taken everything from you. The archives describe a war that lasted 147 years. Velthara said, her voice breaking. It ended only when our ancestors abandoned an entire sector of space and swore never to return. The species they fought was described as having the terrible gift of eternal memory and infinite patience. Counselor Kolvash stared at the ancient text. Are you saying we've encountered humans before? I'm saying our ancestors fought humans 3 centuries ago and learned to fear them so much that they erased most records of the conflict, Velthara replied. But some warnings survived, hidden in the deepest archives. We were supposed to remember to avoid this species at all costs. SciFi felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. And we forgot. We forgot the warnings and made the same mistake. Our ancestors did. But this time, Velthara said grimly, the humans are more advanced, more organized and more angry than they were 300 years ago. And this time they're not content to simply drive us away. They want to make sure we never threaten anyone else again. As if summoned by her words, an aide entered the chamber with an urgent message. Counselors were receiving a transmission from Admiral Morrison of the human fleet. He says he has final terms for our surrender. Put him through, Elder Velthara ordered. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the main screen. He looked older than his years, marked by 15 years of constant warfare, but his eyes still burned with the cold fire of human determination. Velkari High Council, he said formally, I am authorized by the United Earth Government to present our final terms for ending this conflict. We're listening, Velthara replied. First, Morrison said, complete withdrawal of all Velkari forces from human territory within 30 days. Second, reparations equal to 10 times the economic damage you've caused to human colonies. Third, relocation of your entire government and military command to a quarantined sector of space where human monitors will ensure compliance with these terms. The council exchanged shocked glances. These weren't terms of surrender. They were terms of exile. Fourth, Morrison continued, all Velkari educational institutions will be required to teach the history of this war as a mandatory subject. Your Children will learn what happens when the Velkari Empire attacks innocent people. They will understand the consequences of bullying those weaker than yourselves. How long must we accept these conditions? Counselor Morthak asked desperately. Morrison's smile was colder than the void between stars. Forever. These terms are permanent. Your empire will be monitored by human forces for as long as human civilization exists. Your children will learn about your defeat. Their children will learn about your defeat. Every Velkari born for the next 1,000 years will grow up knowing that their species once chose cruelty over wisdom and paid the price for it. And if we refuse? Zephi asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we stop being merciful, Morrison replied simply. We've shown restraint for 15 years because we wanted to give you the chance to learn from your mistakes. But our patience is not infinite. Refuse these terms and we will show you what happens when humans decide that mercy is no longer an option. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Finally, Elder Velthara spoke. The ancient texts warned that fighting humans was like awakening a sleeping mountain, she said quietly. Once roused to anger, they would pursue their enemies with the patience of geological ages and the determination of natural forces. Admiral Lisa Carter stood before the United Earth Council in the emergency session hall on Earth. Representatives from every human colony and space station filled the room, their faces grim as they waited for her report. President Kate Sullivan sat at the center of the council table, her hands folded as she prepared to hear humanity's options. The Velkari have given us 7 days to choose, Admiral Carter said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. Submit to their empire as a vassal species, or face complete destruction. They claim to have never been defeated in 1,000 years of conquest. Councilman Robert Kim from the Mars colony raised his hand. Admiral, what are our chances if we fight them? In a direct military confrontation, we would lose quickly, Carter replied honestly. They have superior numbers, advanced technology, and experience conquering dozens of species. Our entire fleet consists of 20 ships, most of them explorers rather than warships. The hall erupted in worried murmurs. President Sullivan raised her hand for silence. However, Dr. Bell has made a discovery that changes everything. Doctor, please share what you found. Dr. Bell stood up from his seat in the front row. He looked tired but excited as he addressed the council. The Velkari have fought humans before, 300 years ago in a different part of space. The war lasted nearly 150 years and ended with the Velkari retreating from human territory. How is that possible? Asked Councilwoman Janet Porter from the Luna base. We only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. It appears that some humans left Earth much earlier than our official records show, Dr. Bell explained. Perhaps refugees from one of our ancient wars, or explorers who developed the technology in secret. The details don't matter. What matters is that the Velkari fought humans before and lost. President Sullivan leaned forward. Tell us about that war, Doctor. Dr. Bell activated a holographic display showing translated text from the Velkari archives. According to their own records, humans fought differently than any species they had encountered. We didn't try to match their military strength. Instead, we used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and psychological warfare. What kind of psychological warfare? Asked General Rick Stone, Earth's military commander. We made every victory cost them more than any defeat, Dr. Bell replied. When they conquered our worlds, we made occupation impossible through constant resistance and sabotage. When they destroyed our fleets, we built new ones with improved tactics. Most importantly, we never forgot what they did to us, and we never stopped fighting back. The hall was completely silent now. Every representative understood the implications of what they were hearing. The Velkari archives describe humans as a species that holds grudges like stars hold light, Dr. Bell continued. They learned that threatening humanity meant facing an enemy that would pursue them for generations, across star systems and decades, until every wrong was repaid in full. President Sullivan stood up slowly. Dr. Bell, in your professional opinion, How would the Velkari react if we chose to fight them again? Based on their historical records, I believe they would expect a quick victory followed by human surrender, Dr. Bell replied. They have no memory of the previous war because their culture chose to forget it. They think they're facing a new untested species. General Stone raised his hand. What would our strategy be if we choose to fight? Admiral Carter took over the presentation. We wouldn't try to match their fleet strength. Instead, we would focus on making any conquest of human territory as costly as possible. Hit their supply lines, attack their outposts, make them fight the kind of war they're not prepared for. A war of attrition, General Stone said thoughtfully. Wear them down over time rather than trying to defeat them quickly. Exactly, Carter replied. The ancient Velkari texts suggest that their culture values quick, decisive victories. They're not psychologically prepared for a long conflict against an enemy that refuses to quit. Councilman David Lee from the New Boston colony spoke up. Admiral, what would this mean for our colonies? If we fight, they'll attack our civilian populations. They will, Carter admitted. The historical records show that the Velkari's first response to human resistance was to attack civilian targets as a demonstration of power. We need to be prepared for that. The hall erupted in arguments and debates. Some representatives demanded immediate evacuation of the outer colonies. Others insisted that humanity should surrender rather than risk civilian casualties. A few voices called for an immediate preemptive strike against the Velkari forces. President Sullivan called for order. We will vote on this decision in 6 hours. That gives everyone time to consult with their constituents and consider all options. But before we vote, I want to hear from our colonial representatives. Governor Steve Barnes from New Boston stood up. He was a large man with graying hair who had spent his life building the colony from nothing. Madam President, I've read Dr. Bell's reports. I've seen what the Velkari do to species that submit to them. They become slaves in all but name. Governor Barnes, your colony would likely be one of the first targets if we choose war, President Sullivan pointed out. I understand that, Barnes replied firmly. But I also understand what it means to be human. My grandfather fought in the Unity Wars. My father fought in the Mars Rebellion. They didn't fight because they thought they could win easily. They fought because some things are worth fighting for. Councilwoman Helen Price from the Titan Research Station stood next. I represent the smallest and most vulnerable human settlement in the outer system. We have no defenses and no way to evacuate quickly. If war comes, Titan Station will probably be destroyed in the first wave of attacks. The hall held its breath, waiting for her to call for surrender. But I've studied the historical records too, Price continued. I've seen what happens to species that submit to the Velkari. Their cultures disappear. Their children grow up as second-class citizens in their own homes. Their worlds become resource extraction sites for the Velkari Empire. She paused and looked around the hall. I would rather die as a free human than live as a Velkari slave. One by one, the colonial representatives stood and declared their positions. Mars Colony chose resistance. Luna Base chose resistance. The asteroid mining stations chose resistance. Even the most vulnerable settlements chose to fight rather than submit. When the formal vote was taken 6 hours later, the result was unanimous. Humanity would not bow to alien overlords. Admiral Carter returned to the meeting station exactly 7 days after the first encounter. Captain Jake Morrison and Colonel Amy Davis accompanied her, along with a full honor guard of human Marines. This time, they came prepared for war. War Commander HFY was waiting in the meeting room with the same 2 advisors. He looked confident and relaxed, clearly expecting the humans to announce their surrender. Admiral Carter, HFY said as the human delegation entered. I trust you have reached a decision. We have, Carter replied formally. The United Earth Council has considered your offer carefully, and, Elder Mordai prompted. Admiral Carter looked directly at HFY, her voice steady and clear. We respectfully decline your generous offer. The silence that followed was deafening. For several seconds, none of the Velkari moved or spoke. They simply stared at the humans as if they had spoken in an unknown language. Finally, Subcommander. Kolthek laughed. It was a harsh, grinding sound. Admiral, I think there was an error in translation. Did you just refuse our offer? There was no error, Carter replied calmly. Humanity chooses independence over subjugation. We will not submit to Velkari rule. Zephai's yellow eyes narrowed. Admiral, I do not think you understand the situation. We are offering you the chance to survive as a species. The alternative is complete annihilation. We understand perfectly, Colonel Davis said, speaking for the first time. You're threatening to murder billions of innocent people unless we become your slaves. That's not an offer. That's terrorism. The three Velkari exchanged glances. Elder. Mordai spoke slowly, as if addressing children. In 1,000 years, no species has ever chosen war with the Velkari Empire. You would be the first. Captain Morrison smiled grimly. Humans have always been good at being first at things we probably shouldn't try. Zeph stood up abruptly, his massive frame towering over the human delegation. Very well. If you choose destruction over wisdom, then destruction you shall have. We will begin with your outer colonies as a demonstration. When you see what Velkari power can do, you will beg for the chance to surrender. War Commander, Admiral Carter said as she also stood. Before you leave, I want you to understand something about humans. We don't beg, we don't surrender, and we never ever forget. Zeph paused at the door. What do you mean? You're about to attack innocent civilians to try to break our morale, Carter explained. That won't make us surrender. It will make us angry. And angry humans are very dangerous, enemies to have. You think your anger frightens us? Sub-Commander Kolthek scoffed. Admiral Carter's smile was cold as winter. You will. After the Velkari left, Captain Morrison turned to Admiral Carter. Think they believed us? It doesn't matter if they believed us, Carter replied. What matters is that we're about to show them something their empire has never seen before. Dr. Ryan Bell rubbed his tired eyes and looked at his computer screen for the 100th time that day. He had been studying Velkari language files for 18 straight hours, trying to understand everything he could about their culture and history. The fate of humanity might depend on finding some weakness, some piece of information that could help them survive what was coming. The Velkari had been surprisingly open about sharing their historical records. They seemed proud of their conquests and wanted humans to understand exactly how hopeless resistance would be. What they didn't realize was that they had given Dr. Bell access to over 1,000 years of their civilization's records. Most of the files were exactly what he expected. Battle reports, conquest records, and lists of defeated species. The Velkari documented their victories with the thoroughness of a species that had never known defeat. But buried deep in the oldest files, Dr. Bell found something different. The text was in an ancient form of Velkari language that the translation software struggled with. Dr. Bell had to work slowly, checking each word multiple times. But as the meaning became clear, his hands began to shake. It was a warning. A warning written by someone called Kethamoro, described as a wise elder of the Velkari people. The document was over 300 years old, from a time when the Velkari Empire was much smaller than it was today. To those who come after, the translation read, I leave this warning about the species that must never be wakened. We encountered them at the edge of our territory, a young species that had just learned to travel between stars. They seemed weak, divided among themselves, fighting petty wars on their small worlds. Dr. Bell leaned closer to his screen. This didn't sound like any species the Velkari had conquered. He kept reading. We offered them the same choice we offer all species. Join us willingly or be destroyed. They asked for time to decide, as many do. We gave them 30 days, confident they would see reason. They did not. The text continued, and Dr. Bell felt his heart begin to race. When they refused, we attacked one of their outer colonies as a demonstration. It was a small world, barely defended. We destroyed their settlements and took their people as slaves. We expected immediate surrender. Instead, we received a message that chilled my blood. They said they would remember what we had done. They said they would make us pay for every life we had taken. Dr. Bell's hands were shaking now as he copied the text to send to Admiral Carter. This couldn't be a coincidence. The description was too familiar. The war lasted 147 years, the ancient Velkari had written. Not because they were stronger than us, but because they refused to stop. Every time we defeated their fleets, they built new ones. Every time we conquered their worlds, they took them back. Every time we thought we had won, they returned with greater fury. Dr. Bell stood up from his desk and began pacing around his small office aboard the research ship New Horizon. The ship had been sent to analyze everything the Velkari had shared about their empire. Now it seemed they had found something the Velkari hadn't meant to share. He kept reading the ancient warning. They were not like other species we had fought. When we destroyed their cities, they did not weep and surrender. They became angry and built stronger cities. When we killed their leaders, they did not fall into chaos. They chose new leaders, who were even more determined to fight us. The next part made Dr. Bell's blood run cold. They held grudges like stars hold light. They never forgot a wrong done to them. They never forgave an enemy. They passed their hatred down to their children, and their children's children, until their entire species burned with the need for revenge. Dr. Bell grabbed his communication device and called Admiral Carter immediately. She answered on the first ring, her face appearing on his screen looking tired and worried. "Dr. Bell, please tell me you have good news." "Admiral, I've found something incredible in the Velkari historical records. You need to see this immediately." He sent her the translation of Keth Morrow's warning. Admiral Carter read in silence for several minutes. Dr. Bell watched her face change from confusion to shock to something that might have been hope. "Dr. Bell, are you telling me that the Velkari fought humans before?" "I don't know for certain," Dr. Bell replied, "but the description matches us perfectly. A young species divided among themselves, recently able to travel between stars. And the behavior patterns they describe sound exactly like human responses to aggression." Admiral Carter was quiet for a moment, thinking, "If this is true, then the Velkari should remember us. Why don't they?" Dr. Bell had been wondering the same thing. "I think it's because the war ended differently than their other conquests. Look at this part." He highlighted a section of the text. "The war ended not with surrender or victory, but with our withdrawal. We abandoned that entire sector of space and swore never to return. We marked their territory as forbidden and taught our children to avoid it at all costs. So they didn't conquer this species," Admiral Carter said slowly. "They ran away from them." "More than that," Dr. Bell said excitedly. "Look at the final part of the warning." He highlighted the last paragraph of Keth Morrow's message. "If you ever encounter this species again, do not fight them. Do not threaten them. Do not harm them in any way. They are not like other species. They do not know when to stop. They do not understand the concept of acceptable losses. They will follow you to the ends of the universe if you wrong them. And they will never stop until they have taken everything from you. Better to flee than to face their eternal wrath." Admiral Carter stared at the screen for a long time. "Dr. Bell, I want you to search for everything else you can find about this species. Any mention, any reference, anything at all. If the Velkari fought humans before and lost, we need to know everything about that war." Dr. Bell nodded and was about to end the call when another message appeared on his screen. This one was from Lieutenant Ben Clark, an intelligence officer working on Earth. "Admiral, I'm getting another call. It's from Earth Intelligence. They might have found something too." Admiral Carter added Lieutenant Clark to their call. The young officer looked pale and worried. "Admiral, Dr. Bell, we have a problem. Our satellites have detected Velkari fleet movements. They're positioning ships around our colonies." "What do you mean?" Admiral Carter asked. "They have at least 50 warships scattered around human space," Lieutenant Clark replied. "They're not attacking yet, but they're in position to hit every one of our colonies simultaneously. It looks like they're preparing for the war they think we're going to choose." Dr. Bell felt his stomach drop. "Admiral, if they're already positioning for attack, then they never intended to give us a real choice. They're just going through the motions." Admiral Carter's face hardened. "Lieutenant Clark, what's the status of our defense fleets?" We have about 20 ships total, Admiral. Most of them are exploration vessels like the Horizon, not warships. Against 50 Velkari battlecruisers, we wouldn't last an hour in a direct fight. Then we don't fight them directly, Admiral Carter said, grimly. Dr. Bell, keep studying those records. I want to know everything about how humans fought the Velkari 300 years ago. Lieutenant Clark, start working on evacuation plans for our most vulnerable colonies. Admiral, Dr. Bell said quietly, there's something else. I found references to other ancient warnings in the Velkari files. It seems like Kethamora wasn't the only one who tried to warn future generations about humans. There are fragments of other texts, other warnings. I think there might be more information if I can piece it all together. Do it, Admiral Carter ordered. We have 5 days left to give them our answer. I want to know everything we can about this previous war before we make our decision. After the call ended, Dr. Bell returned to his research with new energy. If humans had fought the Velkari before and won, then maybe they could do it again. He began searching through the files with greater focus, looking for any mention of the forbidden species. What he found over the next few hours painted a picture that both terrified and inspired him. The ancient Velkari texts didn't just describe a war. They described a nightmare that had lasted for generations, a species that refused to accept defeat, that turned every loss into fuel for greater vengeance, that pursued their enemies across decades and star systems with the patience of mountains and the fury of storms. The more he read, the more Dr. Bell understood why the Velkari had tried so hard to forget this war. They hadn't just lost. They had been broken by an enemy that simply would not stop. An enemy that had turned their greatest strength, their military superiority, into a weakness by refusing to fight the kind of war the Velkari understood. As Dr. Bell worked through the night, he began to realize something that made him smile for the first time since the meeting with the Velkari. The ancient text described human tactics and strategies that were still being used by human military forces today. The same stubborn refusal to quit, the same ability to turn disadvantages into advantages, the same willingness to fight for as long as it took to win. The Velkari thought they were facing a new species. They had no idea they were about to wake up an old nightmare that their own ancestors had tried desperately to forget. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the alien ship grow larger on the main screen. After 300 years of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, they finally had their answer. The massive vessel was unlike anything human engineers had ever built. Its dark metal surface seemed to absorb light, and strange symbols glowed along its hull like angry red eyes. "Sir, they're sending a message," said Communications Officer Lisa Park. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Every person on the bridge knew they were making history. This was the moment that would change everything for humanity. "Put it through," Jake ordered. The bridge fell silent as every crew member held their breath. 3 months had passed since the first radio signals from deep space had reached Earth. 3 months of preparation for this moment. The alien voice that came through the speakers was deep and harsh, like stones grinding together. The translation software had worked on their language for weeks, building a basic understanding of their words. "Human vessel, you will follow us to the meeting station. Any deviation from the assigned course will be seen as an act of war." Jake exchanged glances with his first officer, Commander Ben Hayes. The aliens had built a space station at the edge of human territory specifically for this meeting. It was supposed to be neutral ground, but the way they spoke made it clear they thought they were in charge. "This is Captain Morrison of the United Earthship Horizon. We acknowledge your message and will proceed to the station as planned." The alien ship turned without another word and began moving toward the distant station. Jake watched it go, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity had found friends or enemies among the stars. 3 hours later, Jake walked through the airlock of the meeting station with Admiral Lisa Carter, Earth's top diplomat. She was a woman in her 50s who had spent her career preventing wars between human nations. Now she faced the challenge of preventing a war between species. Behind them came Dr. Ryan Bell, a scientist who had spent his life studying the possibility of alien life, and Colonel Amy Davis, one of Earth's best military minds. The station was built in two halves. One side was designed for humans, with normal air and gravity. The other side was made for the aliens, called the Velkari. The meeting room was in the center, where both species could survive. Human engineers had worked day and night to build this place, hoping it would be where peace was made. Jake had seen pictures of the Velkari from their first transmissions, but seeing one in person was different. War Commander HFY stood nearly 8 feet tall. His skin was dark gray and covered in what looked like natural armor plates. His eyes were yellow and showed no emotion as he watched the human delegation enter. His face was angular and sharp, with features that seemed designed for intimidation. "So these are the humans," HFY said in their translated language. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "You are smaller than I expected." Admiral Carter stepped forward with a diplomatic smile that Jake knew she had practiced for weeks. "War Commander, we are honored to meet you and your people. This is a historic moment for both our species." HFY made a sound that might have been laughter, but it held no warmth. It sounded more like a growl. "Historic, yes. But perhaps not in the way you hope, Admiral Carter." Two other Velkari stood behind their leader like living statues. One was introduced as Sub-Commander Kolthek, a military officer with scars covering his arms and face. The marks looked like they came from claws or energy weapons. The other was Elder Morday, their chief advisor, whose yellow eyes seemed to see everything and judge it all as lacking. Jake noticed that all three Velkari wore weapons, despite this being a diplomatic meeting. Their weapons looked advanced, with smooth curves and energy cells that glowed with the same red light as their ship symbols. "Let us not waste time with pleasant words," HFY said as they all took their seats around a large metal table. The table was built to accommodate both species, but the Velkari dominated the space with their size. "We will speak plainly. The Velkari Empire has ruled this section of space for 1,000 years. We have encountered 47 different species in that time." Dr. Bell leaned forward with interest, his scientific curiosity overcoming his nervousness. "And you've established peaceful relations with them?" Elder Mordai spoke for the first time. His voice was even deeper than HFY's, like the sound of mountains moving. "We have established order. Some species chose to join our empire willingly. Others required persuasion." "What kind of persuasion?" Colonel Davis asked. Jake could hear the edge in her voice. She was a soldier, and she recognized threats when she heard them. "The kind that ends with complete surrender," Sub-Commander Kolthek said with what Jake was sure was a smile. The expression looked wrong on his alien features. "No species has ever refused our offer twice." Admiral Carter kept her diplomatic expression, but Jake saw her hands tighten slightly on the table's edge. "And what offer are you making to humanity?" HFY stood and began walking around the table like a predator circling prey. Jake noticed that the alien moved with the smooth confidence of someone who had never been defeated. "You have two choices. Humans. First, you can acknowledge Velkari superiority and join our empire as a vassal species. You will keep your worlds, but they will belong to us. You will keep your government, but it will answer to us. You will keep your military, but it will serve us." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake thought about Earth, about the colonies, about the 3 billion humans who had no idea their fate was being decided in this room. "And the second choice?" Jake asked, though he was sure he already knew the answer. "Complete annihilation," HFY said simply, as if he was discussing the weather. "We will destroy every human world, every human ship, every human life. Your species will become a memory, and we will give your worlds to those who serve us. Better." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the station's air recycling system. Jake watched Admiral Carter's face, knowing she was thinking about every human colony, every space station, every child who would never grow up if they chose wrong. Dr. Bell broke the silence, his voice shaking slightly. "How many of those 47 species chose the first option?" 47, Elder Mordai said with satisfaction. Eventually, Colonel Davis repeated. her soldiers' instincts picking up on the word. Some required demonstrations of our power before they understood their situation, Sub-Commander Kolthek explained. We destroyed a few cities, wiped out a military fleet, or two, but they all came to see reason in the end. They always do. Admiral Carter stood slowly. Jake could see her choosing her words carefully, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. This is a decision that affects our entire species. We cannot give you an answer without consulting our government and our people. HFY stopped walking and turned to face her. His yellow eyes seemed to burn with inner fire. How long do you require? 2 weeks, Admiral Carter said. Time to send messages to all our colonies, to hold proper discussions, to make sure every human understands what's at stake. You have 7 of your days, HFY replied without hesitation. Not 1 hour more. When we meet again, you will give us your answer. Choose wisely, Admiral. No species has ever survived choosing war with the Velkari Empire. Jake watched as the 3 aliens left the meeting room without another word, their heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. As soon as they were gone, Colonel Davis turned to the others. Did you notice their weapons? Those weren't ceremonial. They came here ready for a fight. Dr. Bell was making notes on his tablet with shaking hands. I counted at least 12 references to their military superiority. They're trying to intimidate us into submission. It's working, Admiral Carter said quietly. I've read the intelligence reports. Their empire spans hundreds of worlds. Their technology is clearly more advanced than ours. If they're telling the truth about those 47 species, then we're facing an enemy that has never lost a war. Jake looked out the station's viewport at the Velkari ship. It hung in space like a dark promise of death, 3 times the size of the horizon and probably carrying more firepower than Earth's entire defense fleet. But something about the aliens bothered him. They had seemed too confident, too sure that humanity would fold like every other species they had conquered. Admiral, Jake said slowly, did it occur to you that they might not know humans very well? What do you mean? She asked. They keep talking about how every other species eventually surrendered, but they don't seem to understand that humans might be different. Colonel Davis nodded grimly. I was thinking the same thing. They assume we'll react like everyone else they've conquered. But humans have never been known for backing down from a fight, even when we should. Dr. Bell looked up from his notes. There's something else. Did you notice how they kept emphasizing their 1,000-year reign? It's like they're trying to convince themselves as much as us. Admiral Carter was quiet for a long moment, staring at the Velkari ship through the viewport. Finally, she spoke. We need to get back to Earth immediately. The President needs to hear about this and the Council needs to vote.